All right, I'm going to do a bit of review as try to get a running start of our topic this evening, which is basically courtship and marriage. And let me just do a quick review on what we've seen up to this point, because what we're really doing is looking at part of a greater whole, and that whole is how to be a godly man or woman. So we looked at that subject generally, and let me just give you a few of the principles that we saw. That if you want to be a godly man or woman, you need to, first of all, stop following the world and begin following Jesus Christ instead. You need to study carefully the Bible to see who Jesus is and what he's like and what he wants you to be like and what he wants you to do. You do need to fight hard at putting your sins to death. If you don't do that, obviously they're going to overwhelm you. It's going to be difficult to do what the Lord wants you to do. And of course, to do all of this, you do need to put your trust in Jesus Christ, because you can't do it in your own strength. Now we turn then to look at the different stages of life. If you want to be a godly young man or woman, what do you need to do? Well, actually, at that stage of life, it's really quite easy, especially in those years prior to marriage. All you really need to do, according to Scripture, is follow what your parents say. Scripture says you need to honor your father and your mother. The Lord has given to your parents the responsibility to raise you and to prepare you for life, and certainly that's a very good reason, since they also provide for you, that you need to submit to them and obey them. The Lord says that if you do, your life will be blessed, and he will give you a long life, according to Ephesians 6, verses 1 through 3. We emphasize the fact that the road to happiness for you as young men and women is not to write your parents off, but rather to listen to what they have to tell you and to submit to them. We saw, secondly, that when you're young, another problem can be your friends, whether they're good friends or bad friends, and that if you want to be godly, you need to have godly friends. Solomon writes in Proverbs 13:20, "He who walks with wise men will be wise, but the companion of fools will suffer harm." The Bible says bad company corrupts good morals. Even a little bit of bad company is too much, and so the Bible says you need to avoid it. Rather, you need to find friends that are going to do what's right, that's going to help you to do what's right. The psalmist writes in Psalm 119:63, "I am a companion of all those who fear you, and of those who keep your precepts." And so you are to look for godly friends, and you are to try to be a godly friend to your friends. Now, I'm going through this quickly because this is review. This is something we've seen over the past several weeks. Last time we were in this subject, we turned to the subject of courtship and marriage. And we saw that once you've grown up and you're trained, you're ready for life, the next thing you need to do is find a godly spouse. Now, that's something that if you don't have the gift of singleness, that is, if you're not content to be single, this is something you're actually commanded to do. And the reasons we saw were basically three. That if you don't have the gift of singleness, you will be tempted to immorality. And the Bible says that sexual sin is a very serious matter, so you want to avoid that. The way to avoid that, Paul tells us in 1 Corinthians 7, is to get married. You need to get married, secondly, because it's not good to be alone. That's the reason why God made Eve for Adam in the first place. You need someone to share your life with. It's no fun being alone, and it's very difficult to be alone, so the Lord doesn't really intend that. And if you are one of his children, he will provide you with a spouse. Of course, we want to make sure you get the right one, so that's why we're looking at the things we're looking at. And also, the Lord says, once you've grown up and you're out of the stage of being children and you're ready for life, that it's your turn to have children and to raise those children to walk with the Lord and to know him, because God wants future generations to serve him. Every generation, of course, needs to have those who are the Lord's children so that they can do his work. And, of course, as a parent, you love your children, and you don't want your children to end up in hell, which is why you train them to walk with the Lord. You teach them that they need to trust in the Lord Jesus Christ, and hopefully by his grace they will do just that. Now, if this is true, if this is really what the goal of marriage is, to have someone to share your life with, someone who is walking with the Lord to help you raise children to the glory of God. If this is what God's purpose is for it, we then ask the question, what kind of a spouse should you be looking for? So let me just throw this out, and this is going to be reviewing exactly what we looked at last week. If you want to raise children who will know the Lord and walk with the Lord, what should be true of the spouse that you're looking for? Anybody want to venture a guess at that? Sarah? What was that?
A person who has the same desire to raise godly children.
Okay, not only the desire, but somebody who actually is walking with the Lord, right? You want somebody who is going to be, and we've already seen, going the same direction that you're going in this regard. Now, what is it that needs to be true of a person who is walking with the Lord and who knows the Lord? What needs to be true of them? And I'm thinking of pretty foundational stuff here. Ty?
They must be born again in order to enter into the kingdom of God.
Okay, in order to be born again, what is it that has to be true of them? What do you need in order to be born again? Okay, you need an understanding of the gospel. You need to understand the fundamentals of the gospel. Those are the basic, non-negotiable parts of it. And of course, you need the Holy Spirit because you can't trust the Lord without it, without Him. So you do need to be believing the truth. You need to be trusting in Jesus Christ. And then one more thing that must be true of you, and it will be true of you if you actually are trusting in Jesus Christ, is what? I mean, you need not only to believe, but what else do you need to do? It's a part of believing. Maybe it's you need to repent, okay? And repentance, remember, is not, and those of you who are actually, let me ask you this question, because we have several of you that are in the new members class. What does it mean to repent? Does anybody remember from the class that might have been paying attention? Yes, sir? Okay. Okay, well, you need to keep stop doing it. Yes, okay, so here, you're going the wrong way and you stop. Is that repentance? You just keep stopping? Okay, so what else is involved in it? Okay, so you don't only stop doing what you're doing wrong, but you turn around and you go the other direction. So this is wrong, and this is right, okay? So repentance not only means I stop sinning in the sense that I stop doing the bad things, but it means that I start going the right way or that I'm actually walking with God. If you want to train your children to walk with God and you're looking at this from an unmarried youth and you're hoping to get a spouse that's going to help you do this, you want somebody who is walking with the Lord. Otherwise, they're not going to be able to help you do this. They're just going to get in the way. Now, why do you suppose the Lord actually commands you to do that? It's for that very reason. When He says in 2 Corinthians 6, verses 14 through 18, do not be bound together with unbelievers. For what partnership have righteousness and lawlessness? Or what fellowship has light with darkness? Or what harmony has Christ with Belial? Or what has a believer in common with an unbeliever? What do they have in common? Spiritually, nothing. Morally, in principle, they're certainly going to agree on a number of things, but the unbeliever does not love God, and the unbeliever has darkness in their hearts, and the believer has light, truth, knowledge, love for the Lord. They're going a different direction, so they're not going to be able to help you. Now, not only are they not going to be able to help you, but the Lord actually says, do not marry an unbeliever. So what does this say about dating evangelism? Is that a good thing? No. Marriage evangelism? There are people who've tried it. That's worse. That's right. That's even worse. Because now you're bound with someone that may never be converted. You really don't have any guarantee, do you? Just because a Christian marries a non-Christian against the will of God doesn't mean that God's going to convert that person. Okay. So if you want someone who's going to help you fulfill one of the primary reasons why God has us get married in the first place, which is to have godly children, we want to make sure we marry a godly spouse. All right. Now, secondly, The second purpose for marriage is that you marry somebody to provide companionship. Now, what needs to be true of an individual before they can provide you with good companionship? Right? Yes. And what about it? Okay, they need to be a Christian. Is that all that needs to be true of them? Well, okay, compatibility is the issue, but what else, let's say, could be true of someone besides their being a believer that would make them more or less compatible? Yes, Donna. Yes, their pursuits. I mean, what is it that this person I'm thinking about marrying, what is it they're doing? What's their goal in life? And do I feel like I can live with that, or I feel like I'm called to that? Yes, Donna.
Or are you willing to put yours aside? Like, primarily, it would be
Right. And the example that we have from our college days, where we knew a gal that was involved with a guy. They were thinking about marriage. I don't think they were engaged by any means, but they had been a couple for a while, and they were thinking about marriage in the future. And he believed the Lord called him into politics to let's see, what's it called when you stall people on the floor? Yeah, okay, lobby for something. And her heart was out in the wilderness and the wilds with horses and all this type of thing, because she grew up in that kind of environment. His was like a purely political environment. And when she thought about living the rest of her life in that kind of a setting, she said, I don't think I can do that. I don't want to do that. And so she didn't marry this particular individual, but the Lord provided somebody else who loved those same things that she loved, and she could certainly marry him and support what he was doing. And she's having a grand time. She just really enjoys that. So compatibility is not just being believers, but it also has to do with other things, like what is a person called to do. Yes?
Also, I think it's important for us to remember that God calls all Christians to ministry, not necessarily ordained ministry, but to ministry. And therefore, you want to make sure you're both in it together as you serve the Lord. This doesn't call us to attend church and call us to ministry.
Okay. So that both have a heart to serve the Lord is certainly very important. Okay, so they both need to be believers. They both need to have same goals, okay? And really, I think we can say this, the more alike you are, then the easier it's going to be, the better it's going to be for both of you. What about doctrinal beliefs? Is it important that they believe more than just the basic doctrines? You know, I mean, there are certain non-negotiable foundational doctrines of the Bible you have to believe to be a Christian, but then there's a whole gamut of doctrines or teachings of the Bible where churches differ. And I would say that if you're on one end of the spectrum and your spouse is on the other end of the spectrum and you both come from different backgrounds, that could create some compatibility issues, couldn't it? Certainly you would want to work through all of those before you would ever enter into any kind of engagement. Okay. So doctrinal compatibility, similar goals in life, if you come from similar backgrounds, that's also very important. Culture. If you, let's say, you're an American, you're used to maybe a rural kind of environment, and you marry somebody from a Chinese city. You know, there's going to be a few differences in the way you look at things, the way you do things, and that's going to create some issues. So those are things you need to look at before you would enter into an engagement. And I would say that, again, the more alike you are, then the easier it's going to be, the better it's going to be as far as companionship. And then there was one other thing that we looked at, too, as far as if you're going to, and this might actually be better put under the spiritual aspects of it, as far as if I want somebody to help me raise a Christian family, they need to be Christians, they need to be walking with the Lord. But what about maturity in the Lord? How important is that? Is it important? Is it wise, let's say you're a mature Christian, to marry a spiritual babe? What if let's say, as a man, you're looking for a woman. She is a Christian. There's there's a number of things you're compatible with, goals, come from similar backgrounds and so forth. But she hasn't actually grown up to the point where she's willing to submit to what the Lord calls a wife to do in marriage. Maybe she's having difficulty with submission. Would that be a wise choice then? Yes? No? No? Okay. Yeah, obviously not. And of course, if you turn things around, if you're a woman and you're looking for a man and this man has not really grown up enough to provide spiritual leadership for the household, would it be wise to marry that kind of an individual? No. We did have one example within, just the history of this congregation, a young gal who was interested in the possibility of marrying this young man that met in college and so forth, and they entered into a courtship, which we're going to be looking at shortly, had the opportunity to get to know him a little bit, and saw that he didn't really read his Bible, didn't really want to have devotions with her, wasn't providing spiritual leadership and seemed incapable, couldn't find a church to become a part of himself, and to provide that leadership for her, to bring her also into a church. And as she looked at those things objectively, she realized that this guy is really not going to provide the kind of leadership that I need. So she, in the courtship phase, there's no commitment. So she broke it off, and the Lord provided somebody who was a strong spiritual leader. And now she's happily married, but could have made a grave error in that regard and had struggled the rest of her life with that. Okay, so what is it you're looking for? Well, women or young ladies, you're looking for a man who is mature enough to provide, as we saw again last week, Christ-like, loving Christ-like leadership. And certainly one who is able to fulfill his responsibilities to his wife, not the least of which being able to provide. You need to have someone who can provide finances to purchase a home or to provide a place to live and those types of things. And then young men need to be looking for women who are mature enough to be able to submit to loving Christ-like leadership and to be able to fulfill their responsibilities. And by the way, one thing we also looked at was that it would be wise, I think, for a young lady to finish her education and to be able to have some kind of vocation that she could fall back on in case something should ever happen to her husband. When you get married, do you have the guarantee your husband's always going to be living? Is he always going to be there? Is that what the track record shows and from what we see? No, because for one thing, men die, and for another thing, they're not always faithful. And you may find yourself without any means of support with children. If either of those things happen, it would be good to have some education, some ability to fall back on so you could provide for your household in case that should happen, until the Lord may provide another spouse. Okay. Alrighty, so if you find somebody who has these qualifications, the ones we've just looked at, then very likely you'll have a happy marriage. But if you fall for somebody who doesn't have these qualifications, and let's say, okay, whether it be a man or woman, I like the way that person looks. I feel good when I'm with them. I want to marry them because I just want to, kind of thing. It's very likely that you're not going to have a very happy marriage. It's very likely the marriage won't last if the basis upon which you get married is purely looks and personality. And you have to ask yourself the question, is that really what I want? Do I want to have a possibility of an unhappy marriage because I married somebody purely on the basis of what they look like? Or do I want to have a marriage that's going to last and one that I'm going to be able to glorify God in? So that's what we want to look at this evening as we consider how each of these models of dating and courtship, how they provide or don't provide for finding this kind of an individual. Okay, and by the way, when is it that you should begin looking for a spouse? I think that was one question. I'm not sure if we already looked at that or not. Yeah, I think we did, though. When should you begin looking for a spouse? Junior high? High school? How many people do that, right?
When God calls you to.
Okay, when do you think God would call you to do that?
Well, personally, my mom doesn't want me to date until I'm
Okay. Well, that's something to consider, okay, what we've been looking at. Now, do you think that, well, okay, it really has to do, too, with whether you want to finish your education and you want to have some kind of work to be able to back up, and whether you want to think about marrying somebody who isn't ready to support you, and those types of things, okay? Those are things to think about. But I think ideally, when you're done with your education, and when you have something to fall back on, and your spouse or the potential spouse is done with their education, and they have something to fall back on, but it doesn't always work out that way. And we understand that, but I think that would be ideal. I think you do have to be ready, and your spouse has to be ready. And they have to be ready to provide the things that we've looked at already. I mean, you don't want to marry somebody that isn't ready for marriage. Okay? So let's think about then for a moment how you would go about finding such a person. And I wanted to just compare again the two perhaps most common ways. And this could be a shock, I suppose, for those that aren't really thought along the lines of the courtship model. But I just want to put this out for discussion, and let's see what we come up with, okay? And what I want us to do are to consider the pros and cons of dating and courtship in order to find the kind of individuals that I hope that you would want to marry. Okay, so we have dating and courtship. Maybe it would be good before we do this. Yeah, let's see. I probably don't need to leave a lot of space for that. Unless you can think of some things I can't think of. But what are we talking about when we're talking about dating? What is dating? Donna?
I think it would be just getting into a relationship without any idea that there's even going to be any commitment.
Without commitment, maybe without goals. Although that's not always the case, right? But a lot of the dating that goes on today, and by the way, dating begins. When does dating actually begin in our culture? Rebecca? A 12-year-old that's had 6 boyfriends already, okay? It begins relatively early, doesn't it? Okay? So dating is sometimes, I think oftentimes, especially with the very young ages, is they, hey, I like the way you look, and I like the way you look, and I like to hold your hand, and I like to kiss, and I want to have those privileges, so let's date, and maybe this will develop into a relationship, and we can have those kinds of things. But there really isn't any kind of goal in mind. I mean, marriage, maybe in the future, maybe way in the future. But they're not ready for marriage. So they're doing this just to have fun. You know, it's just for fun. And that happens even within the Christian community as well. You know, I just want to have fun because these things are fun. And you know, these kinds of fun things, as we're going to see, can also lead to serious liabilities that we need to take into account. Okay, but what about courtship? What is that? Donna?
A relationship between two young people that is approved by their parents, that involves not just them, but involves their parents on both sides.
Okay.
And where they're actually seriously considering one another for marriage.
Okay.
There's already a commitment going into it.
Okay, so courtship is a relationship with a particular goal. And the goal is to see whether or not that individual qualifies for marriage, is going to be a good choice for me as a spouse, and one that actually has the approval of parents on both sides. Does dating necessarily have that? No, it doesn't. Okay, so what I want to do then is just to consider for a few moments, and we can kind of brainstorm here. What are the pros and cons of both of these methods? I mean, what are the advantages and disadvantages? So I'll leave a little bit more room because I realize that I have courtship on the other side. Let me do this. I'll put another one here. Let's begin with the pros and cons of dating.
Who established the age though for courtship?
Of course, I've already suggested that you shouldn't look for a spouse until you're ready and done with your education and so forth, so I guess it really depends on what age you are when that happens. And granted, there are people who enter into courtships earlier than that, and some people who get married earlier than that, and add the additional stress and work of trying to manage a new relationship while they're still going through college and so forth. And if you want to talk about some things that can put a lot of stress on your marriage, that's certainly one thing that will. A lot of young people don't want to wait until they're done because they want the enjoyment of the relationship, and they want the closeness and so forth. They want, it's fun. I mean, fun's not a bad thing, but if that's all it's for, that's not enough. So I think it really depends. Yeah, okay. So what are the advantages of dating?
It's fun.
Okay. So it's fun, and I was going to mention one other that comes along with that, but as far as, anyway, but what other advantages does dating have? Yes, Michael?
There are people out there who date who are looking for somebody. So you can't say.
Oh, no, yes, and I didn't say.
That's not.
Yeah, and I didn't say, you're right. There are people who are dating looking for a spouse.
And they're sincere about it.
That's why I was saying, though, very early on, when they're 12.
Here's what I would say the con for that is 2 commandments.
Well, can we do the pros for now?
Okay, so they're looking for a spouse.
Okay, okay, it's a way to find a spouse, okay? If we were to contrast it with courtship, I mean, which is easier? Dating, okay, it's easy. Certainly easier than the other. And I think one of the things, what about how long it takes to get into a relationship, dating versus courtship, which is faster? That depends, doesn't it, I suppose, on a number of things, but I would say that this probably is faster, more convenient, more expedient, so forth. You get to the fun faster, you see. You know how we like instant gratification. Just a faster way to get there. So they can do the hand-holding and all that type of thing. All right. Are there any other pros to dating you can think of? Yes?
The norm.
Certainly is the norm. So you're not going against culture, right? Yeah. Yeah, so you fit in, so that's good, okay? It's the norm. I don't stand out. I fit in better. I'm doing what everybody else is doing. They don't look at me like some kind of a medieval weirdo. Yes?
You'll be more likely to find people who want to date than for it.
Okay. Certainly that's true. So let's see, okay, yes, that would be a more available way to do it. You find more available people. Okay, that's true. Yes, Kathy?
If you don't have biblical convictions, dating would have quite a few advantages over courtship. But I don't think for our purposes.
So you don't want to mention those as,
Well,
they wouldn't really,
They
wouldn't be
I could list things as pros, then I would also consider cons.
okay, yeah, well. Did I see a hand back here? Okay. I suppose, and this could be true of Christians as well as non-Christians, I suppose, in our world today, but one other thing that dating would allow would be multiple choices at once, because there's no commitment in dating. That wouldn't, I actually want to call that a pro as far as we're concerned, I suppose.
Although some people, Sean, see dating as more of a commitment. If they're dating, they actually see it more as a commitment than.
Yeah, that may be talking about maybe a slightly deeper level of dating, but you're right. I mean, I'm thinking of more of the casual dating, but then it does get more serious, and perhaps they say we're going to go steady or whatever it may be. Okay, did anyone want to add anything more to the pros here? And maybe what we should be thinking about more accurately would be this. As far as trying to find the kind of person that you're looking for as far as a spouse, what would be the pros of dating? So this really wouldn't fit into that category. And I forget now, let's see, okay, we're looking for a spouse, so that one fits. It is easier, faster, okay. I fit in better, well, then I suppose more people might be willing to do this, so I'd have a bigger choice, more available people. This could or may or may not be helpful, and certainly when we get to the idea of affections, this is a definite minus, okay? As far as what can potentially happen when you're dating? There's a lot of things that could potentially happen. I'm thinking about things that aren't necessarily bad, but could be bad. If you spend enough time with somebody, what's going to happen?
All of your emotions get involved.
Yeah, you might actually fall in love with that person, right? And what if they're not a person you should fall in love with, you see? So that could be a problem here, although it doesn't necessarily have to be. Courtship, though, has something, at least in the guidelines, built in that might prevent something like that. So the idea of multiple, I mean, what if you're getting together with several different people and you begin to develop affections for all of them, this kind of thing. So, okay. What are the downsides to dating? What's that?
No protection.
Protection, okay, no protection. And what do you mean by no protection? Would that be accountability?
Concerning intimacy.
Okay, so I'm going to put that here, although it doesn't necessarily have to be the case. Oftentimes it can be. Because typically with dating you don't have, can anyone think of the name of an individual that might accompany you, or a chaperone? There's typically not a chaperone in dating, but that's not always the case. Okay, so what else can you think of that might be a problem with dating? What was that? Temptation? Okay, that's true, and I think that comes from the idea of not having enough accountability, because these things typically go on where there is nobody to watch, and I mean, it doesn't have to be the case, but it often is the case, especially among youth that may be having relationships among their peers in school. These things can happen, and if there's nobody watching and they're not accountable to anyone, that certainly could fall into sin if the emotions, if the affections begin to get stirred up. Oh, yes. I'm sorry. Yes.
More likely that your heart is going to get broken.
Ah, okay, very good. The idea of a broken heart. And Rob? Okay, it certainly can get expensive. That's right, okay. By the way, when you're dating, it doesn't have to be this way, but oftentimes it is. If you don't have accountability, then the likelihood that you could get involved with somebody who is not a believer is stronger. Because then the one who's paying the most attention is, of course, the youth that's getting involved in these things. And we have to admit that there are certain parents that aren't paying attention. Michael?
Coveting, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house, their wife, their maidservant, etc., and anything else. So anything else would fall under thy daughter or thy son.
Okay.
Kids don't like that either. But the other one is defrauding. And defrauding has to do with the idea that when one person could be in love and open up their life, and then the other person doesn't feel the same way, and maybe they're trying to be, they're not doing anything wrong, they just weren't where they were at. They're going to get defrauded.
I think from our conversation about this before, is Michael was saying the idea that some guys kind of go into this dating thing trying to get a girl interested in them, and then once they do, he leaves them, and it leaves a string of broken hearts because he was promising something by his behavior, but there was no commitment, and so he's ended up defrauding that person.
I'll give you an example from my own life. After I married Denise, we were asked to go over to lunch at a couple's house, and I knew the wife before she knew her husband up in Sacramento area. And I didn't ask for this, all of a sudden she starts telling us, Michael, do you remember the time you invited me to that Bible study? And I was just being a nice guy. She was a loner. I invited her to our big Bible study. She starts going, Michael, I have such a crush on you, and I'm just going, what? I mean, but I defrauded her. I wasn't sensitive about that.
But did you really defraud her if her expectations were much higher than you ever intended?
But she did. I didn't do anything saying how vulnerable I needed to be careful about. I could have, if now I would have said, I'll go get a girl I asked you.
Okay, and it's because you were not aware of her level of affections already that had developed for you. Okay, right. Okay. Did anybody else want to add anything? Yes, Dick?
Give a quick definition of dating and courtship. What makes them different from one another? What are the particulars that make them different?
Well,
Dating, I've seen very restrictive dating, very open dating.
well, granted, I think what we had in mind, which is why we kind of wanted to draw the parameters at the beginning, was with the idea of dating is getting together, going out with people without any particular goal in mind. You know, you're not really looking toward marriage. You may be looking toward a relationship, but that relationship is not really marriage, perhaps. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But you're basically getting together just to have fun. Whereas courtship does have a particular goal in mind. And granted, I mean, there is dating with a goal in mind. When you're older and let's say you're beyond, let's say, the 12-year-old level and it's not, you're not looking just to have fun, but you're actually looking for a spouse. Some people go about it by way of dating. And people perhaps who are out on their own might be more likely to do something like that, although they certainly, whether they're in the house or not, they still need the consent of parents, I believe, and especially the daughter, according to Scripture, needs to have the consent of her dad before she can enter into an engagement and a marriage relationship. But courtship, from the way we're defining it here, would have the parental involvement from the very beginning. The goal would be that they're looking at each other, not to get together to have fun, but they're looking at each other as potential spouse. And courtship allows them the environment in which to do that without a commitment, and hopefully with some checks on their emotions, because there's certain guidelines in view that would help shape what they're doing so they don't hopefully end up with one of these broken hearts, and also with enough accountability they don't end up with the temptation and that type of thing to fall into sexual sin. Anybody else want to add anything to the cons of dating? I had basically these: begins too early, certainly. At least that happens. If you say, we're not going to do the dating game, we're going to do courtship, then basically if your 12-year-old daughter comes to you and says, Mom and Dad, I'd like to have a boyfriend, then you're going to say, no, that's not going to happen, because at your age, you're nowhere near ready for marriage, There's no goal behind this, and the liabilities are many. That's how you get, of course, teen pregnancies and so forth, and we don't want that to happen. So begins far too early. They're not mature enough, not ready for marriage. They're not looking for marriage. There's no goal in mind. The idea that they're far more likely to fall into a relationship with an unbeliever, and I'm thinking about young people at this particular juncture, not older ones that may be more mature and can figure this out. Far more likely to get into a relationship with somebody who isn't ready for marriage. Again, I like the way you look when you think about Samson. Dad, get this Philistine girl for me. I like the way she looks. It's not exactly the basis that you should form a marriage, but oftentimes that's the way it goes. Far more likely into getting a relationship without the consent of parents, so without parental consent. The difficulty of accountability, more likely to fall into sexual sin. We talked about that with regard to temptation. Easier to form attachments. This is one that we heard with regard to the broken heart. Easier to form attachments that will only cause pain or shame in the future. I mean, what if you get really close to somebody and this is something that happened earlier in life, and this is somebody who's still in your life, and you got into this relationship and somebody broke it off for one reason or another. Each time you look at that individual, it's going to bring nothing but pain. There's not going to be anything good about that. It may even bring shame if you fall into temptation. It will end your relationship, could feasibly forever, with that individual. But you don't want to have that kind of baggage behind you when you go into a relationship with somebody who is going to be your spouse, especially if it happens to be somebody that they know. Let's see. Yes, okay. So one thing that Michael was talking about as well, the idea of defrauding, not so much that you would be defrauding somebody, but giving your heart. You do need to protect your heart and not get emotionally involved in the word I'm looking for, I guess, would be not letting your affections get tangled up in a particular individual that you're never going to marry. It's not going to do you any good. It's not going to do them any good. And when that rupture takes place, that is going to end the relationship. It's going to injure one or both of you. Usually it's one, but sometimes it can be both. And seldom does a relationship like that end on a good note for both individuals. So I think that courtship does allow, and again, if we do this properly, I think it can allow protection in all of these areas to overcome all of these downsides here. So I think if we were just to, go over here and begin to look at the pros as opposed to the cons here, I think you have, of course, the relationship beginning at the time when both are ready, because that's, it's the idea. I'm ready. I'm looking for somebody else who's ready. And I think if you can keep in a courtship, you obviously want to enter into a courtship with somebody you're interested in, right? There's already an interest. You don't just, your parents don't just bring you somebody and say, oh, look here, son, or look here, daughter. I found somebody for you. Why don't you court them? That's not exactly how it works. The youth, you're involved in it as well. I mean, you're looking for somebody. You find somebody. You think, I think this might be a good choice, but I'm not entirely sure. And so you get the advantage of counsel. First of all, you get consent of parents who are going to be helping you look at that person that you may not be able to do quite. I mean, you're not going to be able to analyze them quite as well as your parents are. They're going to be able to help you determine whether this person is a believer or an unbeliever. So you're going to get counsel from them in this regard. Actually, you want consent and counsel. And you can get counsel this other way, but this is actually set up with this kind of accountability in mind. Okay? They're going to be able to tell whether the person is ready. Again, counsel of your parents. Certainly with a courtship, you do have the consent of all the parties that are involved. I think the idea, again, if you have, I think if it works properly, in a vast majority of cases, and perhaps even without exception, you're going to want to make sure that you're always in a public arena when you're courting, because courting does involve dating to a certain degree, doesn't it? I mean, you get together with the youth. By the way, is anybody familiar with some of the old ways that they did that in the past? When they'd get a young man and young woman together and they wanted to make sure that they didn't fall into sin. They always made sure that they had a chaperone, usually the parents, but sometimes it could be someone else or it could be in a public setting. But if they were ever alone, in certain circumstances, and I'm talking about back in perhaps in the 1600s, 1700s, they would actually have a wall between them. And they would have a tube that would go between the walls, and they would talk to each other through the tube. And if a young man ever spent the night in a young lady's house, that they would, of course they would be in separate rooms, but they would sew that young man up in a bag, in a big burlap sack, and they would note the stitching to make sure the stitching was the same stitching in the morning that it was in the evening. Maybe I don't know if you ever saw the movie The Patriot. They had that going on. That was actually something that happened. It was called a bundling bag, and that was to keep them, of course, both chaste. So you have the oversight, you have counsel. By the way, in courtship, you also check out the individual. With dating, you have the youth just kind of getting together on their own and developing a relationship without a lot of accountability. But you can even have, in this kind of an arrangement, you can have references. And that's not a bad idea, especially if it's somebody you don't know. You get people to vouch for the character of that young man or that young woman. Maybe their pastor or their parents or friends, maybe mutual friends or whatever, but you have somebody who knows them, so you know they're not just coming in and trying to take advantage of you. Okay, what else do we have here? If you do this properly, then, and the idea is that you don't get emotionally involved. You don't get your affections wrapped up in this other individual until you know that they are ready, until you know that they are a believer, until you know that they're a mature believer, they have the kind of maturity that's necessary to get married, that they're able to provide. You get something of their character and you get to learn something of their goals and their background and so forth that they come from, and whether or not you guys are compatible. And it really isn't until you find out that they are compatible that you would even allow yourself to begin to love that individual. Because love, in most instances, love is a choice. You choose to love someone. There are cases, of course, where there are reasons why you would do this, of course, or why you might feel this way, but you might see that individual and you may instantly fall in love, but you need to guard your heart against that type of thing, because your heart could easily be broken and so forth, and you don't want to give your heart or allow yourself to begin to love that other person until you are sure that they're somebody that is actually a potential spouse. So let's see, what else? I think one other thing too is I think that this kind of an arrangement, if you go into it with the express purpose of looking at each other as a spouse, I think there are certain ways in which you would actually experience less stress. Because, let's see. Because you're really going into this for the same purpose. There's so many things involved in dating, whether or not the other person likes you, why it is they're involved in this relationship in the first place. But with courtship, it's all expressed. I'm meeting with you for the express purpose of finding out whether or not you're a suitable spouse for me. And the other person is entering into it with the same kind of expectation. And I think you can just be more objective in this kind of an environment than you would be if you're doing it on account of, I like the way this person looks and you're trying to get close to him and so forth. So I think the idea of lower stress levels might also come in. That too. For the parents and for the couple, I think.
One of the things I look at this is you've got to take in consideration our culture. A lot of kids go away to school. Mommy and daddy have no idea what's going on with Junior.
So 2 hours in chaperone.
There's different. So how does that work away from distance? Some children stay at home, and so you've got more control. I think one of the reasons people do look at, to be frankly, courtship is, and the homeschoolers remain the leaders on that, is they want more parental influence. That we should be ashamed of that because of thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's daughter. That's a sin.
Yes. And the other reason why you want consent of the parents all along the way is especially with regard to what the Bible says, the father's relationship to his daughter. The father actually has the authority to give or to withhold his daughter in marriage. And in the past, when culture actually took that seriously, if you were to read, for instance, I think it was either William Gouge or Thomas Gouge. I keep getting the two mixed up. I think it was Thomas Gouge. In his domestic duties, talks about how one instance where a young man and a young woman, apparently they realized their parents were not going to consent to the marriage, so they decided to elope. And so they took off together, they married secretly, and they basically disappeared from their parents. But their parents knew what they had done, set the constable on them, basically. The police found them out, and when they found them, they took them, they separated them, they annulled the marriage, and it was not valid in that society, in that culture, because there was not parental consent. Now, we don't have that in our culture. I mean, youth could feasibly do that, but one thing you need to realize is that if a young man and young woman get married without parental consent, and the father says on the day that he hears that his daughter has done this, if he says no, then even though their marriage may be recognized by the state, their marriage won't be recognized by God, and they will in fact not be married. So you do want consent. What's that?
That's a Roman Catholic view. Gershon would disagree with you. That's a Roman Catholic view you just stated.
Well, it's also a biblical view. So if the Roman Catholics happen to land on that, then that's okay. But that is, as a matter of fact, what the Bible says. 1 Corinthians 7. a man may withhold his virgin daughter or give her in marriage. So the idea, though, and also any vow which the daughter makes, as long as she's under the headship of her husband, he can annul it on the day that he hears it. That would include also a marriage vow. Okay. But so the idea is you do need consent. You do need consent of parents, and I think you're going to have that more likely. It's not that you can't have it on this model, but I think with all the safeties that are built into this, I think it's a much more biblical way of approaching it. Okay, so what are the cons, real quickly, of courtship? What's the downside?
You can still end up with a broken heart.
That's true. There's no guarantee against that, is there? So that, but it's less likely to happen, right? So we might say it's one of the pros maybe it's less likely your heart's going to get broken, as long as you remember to withhold your affections. You see, I realize again that can be tough, but you don't want to fall in love with someone that you don't want to marry. But you can, and that's the reason why so many people end up with broken marriages. Now, it is true that this person may seem all glittery and they may pass all the tests, and actually you can go through this whole process and you can still end up with a broken marriage. That can still happen because people can fall into sin. They can fall away. I know of a gal that got married, and she wanted to do the courtship. She was, I think, in her 40s at the time, and a gentleman that she was interested in was in his 40s, and they tried to have as much accountability as they could. Everything was searched out. It appeared as though everything was just right. Everything was fine. They got married, but there was something that wasn't known when the marriage took place, and after several years of defrauding, although in a different sense, I want to tell you exactly what the defrauding was, they ended up getting a divorce anyway. So it's not an absolute ironclad method of making sure that you get married, but to someone who is worthy, but you're much more likely to do it this way than you will this way. And if you do find someone this way, it's only because I think you're veering in this kind of direction. And again, I'm thinking of the courtship model particularly for young men and young women, still quite young, just reaching the age where they're wanting to get married, and especially with the idea of the parental consent that's necessary, in particular, as I said, for the father to give consent for the marriage of his daughter. So anyway, I was thinking with regard to cons, perhaps looking at these things, it maybe somebody might think it's not as much fun. It's not as easy. It's not as fast, you know. Certainly is not the norm. You're going to maybe look strange. You don't have to, you know. As a matter of fact, why don't you think, okay, this is really what's honoring to the Lord, so this is what should be the norm, and even though the world may be going more this direction, by the way, do you see dating in the Bible? What you see more is an arrangement that we even call betrothal, right? But it doesn't always have to be that. It can fit this model actually quite well. I mean, even Samson, although just use him as a negative example, he had his dad make a deal with the dad of the girl he was interested in to marry her, and that's the way they did it in those days. He didn't just go to the girl and say, hey, would you like to go out? You know, let's go to the Philistine temple and have a bite to eat or whatever. He did it the way that it was done even in the Philistine culture. They did it through parents. And they set it up. Only in this case, there wasn't the matter of are we compatible, because in those days that didn't seem to be as big an issue, did it? It's, well, the parents like each other. They want their kids to get married, so they make this arrangement when they're children. Or when they get a little bit older, they made these arrangements because maybe the youth were interested in it, like Jacob and Leah and Rachel, and really Rachel. He goes to the dad and says, I'll work 7 years for your younger daughter, Rachel. And the guy says, okay. And so that was it. And then he gives him Leah instead. So that was a double cross. But I think I still can't quite figure out how Jacob didn't know the difference. But be that as it may, yes.
With courtship, I would think there'd be a lot of responsibility on the parents. This could be a con. The parents could be too lax in their idea of courtship, but they could also be too restrictive, just looking for that perfect person that's not even there.
That's true. We've got to make sure that we're realistic. I knew a friend who was in seminary, and he had a list for himself, a list of 40 things that had to be true of the girl he would marry. And he put every girl he was meeting and thinking about courting, he was putting her through this criteria of these 40 things, and all the girls were being rejected. And then he met this one girl, and he looked at his list of 40 things, and she didn't match up with any of them, and he took his list and threw it away, and he ended up courting her and marrying her. I think they're still happy, still happily married. So do you have to be careful with regard to those kinds of things? Yes, that's true. That's right. Donna?
A lot of this, will depend on the relationship between the parents and the children. Has to be a lot of communication, and the kids understand that it's for their good and that it's a great deal of love and parents they have to have.
Right, and I think that concern needs to be tempered by what, was it Michael, were you the one that talked about the idea, or no, I think it might have been Dick, as far as not being too restrictive, not being, setting your standards way too high. The idea is we don't want to have unrealistic expectations, and this model does not mean that a young man and a young woman can't pick out who it is they want to court. It's not like the parents are picking them for them, but although the parents might say, well, have you considered this person? Have you considered that person? But you need to realize, especially our children here, need to realize that your parents have a lot more experience in this area, and you need other eyes looking at this. Now, parental expectations should not be through the ceiling. They can't be unrealistic, and they're going to be perhaps more tempted to do that kind of thing, whereas our youth might be tempted to lower the standards too low. So we need to try to work and find somebody who is going to be a good spouse, and you do need to believe that your parents are trying to find somebody for you, help you to find somebody that is going to be a good husband, a good wife, okay? And you have to believe that's where the relationship comes in. There has to be that trust. So you want that kind of involvement, and you want that kind of accountability. You want those safeguards, and you want somebody always standing there reminding you, don't get emotionally involved, don't get your heart wrapped up in this individual until you know that this person is, it qualifies. Somebody who would make a good husband, a good wife.
Can I make a couple comments?
Certainly.
Betrothal is a little bit different than courtship. In a betrothal, you had a legal contract that was not breakable before the marriage was consummated. So when you think of Mary and Joseph, you also think of Christ and the church. We right now are in betrothal. There's going to be the marriage supper of the Lamb, and that's in the future.
Depending on your eschatological view, yes, okay.
And I mean, there's betrothal, and the point was that in betrothal, there wasn't a fear of opening their lives up and learning to love one another because they couldn't get out of it except for what? Fornication. It didn't say you could divorce them except for adultery, because adultery and fornication are two different sins. So that law was taking care of the betrothal. Because if they hadn't come together, there could be fornication on part of one of the partners. The other thing was that, it would be proper if you trained your children that the sons would they might consult with their father, and then the father tells them, you need to talk to the father of the girl, not the girl, because you don't want to defraud her, because she might get all excited and this and that, and let the father talk to the girl. And the same thing, the girl needs to be trained that if somebody approaches her, tell him, you talk to my father. I mean, but that takes cooperation on the part of the children, and that's very hard for these children today because of the culture we live in, and what they're being fed all the time.
Right. Well, certainly that would be the case. There are, I think there's a sufficient number of examples in Scripture where you have the two people involved. They have some concern in it, not just a parental betrothal. I'm thinking of like Jacob when he wanted Rachel and so forth, or Samson when he wanted the Philistine girl. You also have an example of Abraham sending a servant to Paddan Aram to find a wife for Isaac. And she leaves saying, I'm going to be this man's wife, and she doesn't even know what the guy looks like. I mean, it was quite a bit different in those days. I think the things that were mainly of concern to her was whether or not he would be able to provide for a household. And they just simply made the commitment, if they entered into this relationship, that they're going to love each other. So sometimes the love was based upon appearance, that was involved in it. Sometimes it was a pure betrothal while they were children. Sometimes the father would send his servant over to find somebody for his son. You ever hear of mail order brides? That was something that actually happened in our culture. I'm not even sure if they had a picture catalog, They just sent for somebody to be his wife. He lives in another country, and some woman says she's going to do it, and she goes out and becomes his wife.
I have a question about honoring father and mother. It says that you leave your father and mother, and is there not a new accountability structure then, where now the husband is now the one that you're more accountable to, not that you don't honor your parents, but there's a change in accountability there?
Yes, yes. So once the father gives his daughter away, she does come under the headship of another man. And that's something we'll look at when we get to the marriage relationship itself, that is true. But until the father gives her away, she's still under his authority in that regard. He's still her head. And you're right, even after she comes under her husband's headship, she still needs to honor her parents. Yes. Well, yes, Ty?
I feel like this is like frogs in a pond. Because like, if you look at the biblical viewpoint of betrothal or courtship and such, the first marriage is done by God. He's the matchmaker. He's the one that provides the perfect match for Adam. Of course, there's only one mate. But even in the other examples that you pointed out, when God is the matchmaker, I think we see a pattern there, and that the parents then of believers are pointed to the same precept, that we need to exercise the same level of concern and oversight that the Father has done, Abba Father, and how we should go about looking diligently for the right mate, possibly for our children, whether it be male or female. That Rob had a thought. I think you just wait.
Well, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, no, okay. I was thinking if you had something. But the thing is, I see in a lot of other cultures, Asian cultures, Middle Eastern cultures, where courtship is arranged by the parents. It's not like the American mentality or European mentality where it's also romantic and fall in love, and therefore, heaven forbid anyone should interfere with this process, especially the parents. So it's turned upside down rather than seen as a godly model, and is denigrated rather than esteemed.
Now, what you said is certainly true. I mean, when God made the woman and brought her to the man, he was actually functioning as Adam's father, because as a matter of fact, he was Adam's father. Okay, and I think in every instance, except perhaps the instance of Samson, although what he did was not exactly according to the way things should be done. Isaac actually had sent Jacob to Paddan Aram to find a wife. Now he didn't. Abraham sent his servant to bring one to Isaac sight unseen, but I think because of the turmoil between the two brothers was another reason why Isaac sends Jacob to Paddan Aram. Plus, he didn't want him to get a daughter from the Canaanites the way that Esau had done. But anyway, he actually does go. There was a specific family that he had to find this wife in. But I think other than that, he did have some choice in the matter.
And his hand was being guided every
Right. But what I'm saying is that it wasn't as though Isaac, not Isaac, but in this case Jacob, had no desire for Rachel. I mean, I think he liked the way she looked, and he was actually disappointed when he found, Leah. And Leah met those qualifications as well as Rachel. I mean, it could have been Leah, but he went for Rachel. So what I'm saying is that I think parents should take the preferences of the youth, of course, into account. That's not something we want to exclude, and we want to be careful that we don't get an idea of, okay, this is my absolute choice, and I'm going to enforce this. And we've seen, those types of movies where cultures did that, and the youth rebel against it because they really don't want to marry this individual and so forth. Obviously, a wise parent will take into account the desires of the youth, because there may be several people that actually qualify to be a spouse. But we do want to make sure that we don't let them get involved with somebody who is not qualified to be their spouse. But I think your point is well taken, Michael. And can you make this brief? Because Michael, can you make this brief? Because we're really way out of time. So I said we need to keep the comments brief at this point because we're well out of time.
I know people, you start talking about courtship or betrothal, they right away think of arranged marriages. That's not really what's going on. It's a combined, anybody can veto it. The kid can veto it, the parents can veto it. The question is, are they going to respect and try to understand what did this other person, why is the other person vetoing it? And honor it.
Okay.
I mean,
Okay.
you might learn something.
Right. So anyway, we do want to take into account the idea of consent. Again, the whole idea is we do want to help our children find the best match they possibly can, the most compatible match they possibly can, especially that individual be a believer who is mature and one who is ready to provide, one who is actually qualified to be a spouse, because we know, all of us who were parents, when we were younger, we weren't looking necessarily for these qualities. Perhaps we were, but certainly not when we were really young. When I was in high school, that was not what I was looking at. So I didn't really have that kind of guidance, and that's what we as parents need to provide, and hopefully our children will understand the importance of that kind of guidance, because most marriages fail today, and they fail because of sin, ultimately. Some of that is because you end up marrying somebody who's not a committed Christian, or somebody who isn't a Christian at all, or somebody has such varied beliefs, or somebody, again, who's not mature, or somebody who maybe can't provide, and there's a whole gamut of things. But if you don't really let yourself get involved with somebody who isn't qualified, you're not going to have that kind of difficulty. And having the parents involved at every level of this will help you find somebody who really is going to be a blessing to you and not a curse to you. Anybody want to add anything else? Because we actually had intended to end this maybe around 8 o'clock, and it's about 20 after. Yes?
Is it possible to honor God in a dating relationship?
Well, now, are you talking about dating for the purpose of marriage? Okay. Then if the main difference is going to be the idea of accountability, why would you want to do this rather than this?
Because of different strokes for different folks. If they're just, as long as they're a believer and you believe they
Now, do you
meet your standards, maybe the family's just different and you want to date instead of court. Maybe it's just you feel like dating is better for you personally.
Well, the idea, though, see, I'm trying to understand what you mean by dating, because actually, if you're looking for a husband and you start, let's say, getting together with this young man, and you start doing things together, if the purpose is marriage, don't you want the consent of parents for that? Okay, don't you want certain safeguards to make sure you don't fall into sin? So what I'm wondering is whether you're conceiving of something different than courtship, you may actually have that in mind. It's not, I mean, before you get involved with this young man, you should really have the approval of your parents. If your parents, and I forget, do you have just a mother, or do you have a father as well?
I have a mother and a father, but
And-
not a mother and a father.
Okay. Okay. So I think you would want, of course, your biological parents, especially if they're Christians, you want consent, even if they're not. When I got to the point where I was going to ask for Donna's hand in marriage, and even though her dad is not a Christian, I still went and talked to him and asked for his consent. For one thing, she made me do it, but
Even if my parents are divorced, the guy would still have to go to my dad.
because biblically he still has authority over
Even
you.
if my dad isn't really involved in my life very much.
I think it would also help. Is your mother remarried? I wasn't quite sure of the.
No.
Okay, then certainly, because he would still be your head technically. He should be involved, but he's not. That's sin on his part. God's going to hold him accountable for that. But if you need biblically the consent of your dad, then I doubt if this is the situation that you would probably even find any kind of obstacle, but you should still honor him by asking for or having the young man ask for that. Especially when, I mean, when you know how the ceremony goes when people get married, and who gives this woman to be married to this man, and you usually have this, her mother and I do, thing. That came about because of the importance of parental consent. It's just perfunctory today, but it used to mean something years ago. They couldn't actually get married without that, and they had to have that up front at the ceremony. So anyway. But I'm wondering again if, I mean, you're not wanting to say, what we're saying about dating is there's no goal in mind. I'm doing this just to have fun. I realize that I might end up falling in love with this person, and this person may not even be qualified, but I'm going to date him anyway. I mean, this is what we're talking about on this side. I think what you're asking about, I mean, can I date some guy with the purpose of getting married? Well, that certainly courtship is involved in this, but I guess what we'd have here in courtship is we'd have it a little bit more narrow. You're looking at this guy specifically for that purpose, and you're not going to be playing the field while you're doing it, you see. Just going to be this guy, and for him, it's going to be just you. And you're going to have this consent, you're going to have some oversight and accountability so you don't fall into sin, and you're not going to let yourself get wrapped up emotionally until you know this person's qualified to be a husband. I mean, really, it should be everything that you would want. This is no commitment, nothing. This is for fun, and a lot of things can go wrong here. So I think maybe we need to just spend a little bit more time developing the idea of courtship to get a better idea of what we're really talking about here. Did anybody have any final comments or questions, Rob?
Just prayer, I think it'd be really good, if parents are praying with their kids, I mean, not just a one-time kind of, I mean, just an ongoing, where you're really praying to God and the right person.
Right. One thing I was going to mention, just capping this off, is asking the question, how should you go about looking for a godly spouse? I mean, to enter into, let's say, a courtship. How do I find this person that I'm going to enter into a courtship with? We certainly want to approach it prayerfully, and if your parents are Christians, or either one or the other, one thing they should have been doing for years is praying for you, and for this particular area. Donna and I actually started praying for our children with regard to spouses before they were conceived. And we were married for nearly 10 years before we had our first. So this is something you should be praying for throughout your life, and even before you have children, that God would be preparing this time. So you approach it with a great deal of prayer. Certainly the idea of seeking the counsel of your parents is very important, and where you look for somebody potentially is also very important. Where would you look for a potential spouse? Being a Christian, wanting to be godly, wanting to follow the Lord, wanting to find a companion, wanting to find somebody who's going to help me raise children that are going to walk with the Lord.
Someone in your church or involved in another church or something?
There you go. You look in the Christian community. You don't go to the bar. You don't go to the beach. That's not where you're going to find them. So you look in the Christian community for them. And then again, I think if you enter into this relationship with accountability, and again, hold yourself back your heart back until you know this person is qualified biblically and is going to make a good spouse. Because remember, your choice is not only going to affect you, but who else is it going to affect profoundly? It's going to affect your children. And you want to make sure then that you get the very best you possibly can. You want God's choice for you, of course. But this is, I believe, one of the ways that God has given to find that person that God has for you. I do believe that God actually has a choice, but you need to find that choice, and there may be some tests and trials along the way. So this is the way that I believe that God has ordained things and given us instruction in His Word to try to head off most of the problems that could get involved in trying to find that spouse. Any last questions or comments? Okay. Why don't we let's have a word of prayer and close this time.